Okay, so you know those little things that make browsing the web so much easier, like, yeah,
Extensions.
extensions. I mean, think about it, that dark mode reader that saves our eyes, password managers that keep us from having a total meltdown trying to remember all those logins, or even those focus tools that help, actually focus.
Right, right.
We use them every day, but we don't really think about them too much. They're just kind of there.
Yeah, they've become almost invisible, haven't they? But they really do add a ton of power and flexibility to our browsers. It's like we can tailor the whole internet experience to exactly how we want it.
Exactly. But, and here's where things get a little dicey, all that convenience comes with a side of something we got to talk about,
Yeah.
security.
Oh, yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, it's kind of like, adding all these cool aftermarket gadgets to your car.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Some of those gadgets might have a back door you didn't know about, right?
Yeah. That's a really good analogy. And the scale of this is pretty mind-blowing. Just the Chrome Web Store alone, as of like mid-2023, had over 140,000 extensions. And some research suggests that, get this, the average enterprise user might have something like over 1,400 extensions installed.
1,400. That's crazy. And you got to wonder how many of those are actually vetted. Like, do the IT guys, the security teams even know what half of those things are?
Right, it's a huge potential blind spot for a lot of organizations. It's like a whole shatter world of software running on their systems.
So that's what we're going to dive into today. We'll look at the different kinds of permissions these extensions ask for, the very real risks they can pose, and, the big question, what can we actually do to be safer?
Exactly. We need to understand how these things work, what they can access, and how to make informed decisions about which ones we allow into our digital lives.
And we'll even unpack a really interesting real-world example, an extension called Download Manager Integration Checklist. Sounds
Oh.
harmless enough, right? But it turned out to be a pretty sneaky piece of work.
Oh, yeah, that one's a great case study in how things can go wrong.
So before we go any further, let's just back up for a sec. What is a browser extension in like plain English?
Sure. So at their core, browser extensions are basically tiny software programs, you could almost call them mini apps, that add new features to your web browser. They can change how a website looks, how it behaves, or even add entirely new functionality.
Okay, so they're not just like cosmetic tweaks. They actually have the power to do things within the browser.
Exactly. And that's where the security concerns come in. They have this privileged access to your browser and its inner workings, which makes them very attractive targets for hackers or anyone else with bad intentions.
Now, I've heard them call all sorts of things, extensions, plugins, add-ons. Are those all the same thing, or is there a real difference?
Yeah, that can be a little confusing. But these days, especially when we're talking about modern browsers like Chrome or Firefox, those terms are mostly used interchangeably. You'll usually see extensions and add-ons the most. Plugins used to refer to older tech like Flash or Java applets, but those aren't really a thing anymore.
Okay, so we can basically lump them all together as extensions for this conversation.
Exactly.
So we've got these extensions, they have this special access, and they have to tell the browser what they can do through something called, what was it, permissions.
That's right. Every extension needs to declare what it's allowed to do. It does this in a file called manifest.json. Think of it as the extension's rulebook. It tells your browser exactly what the extension needs to function and what data it can access.
And I'm guessing these permissions are not all created equal.
Definitely not. They can be really broad, like giving the extension access to your browsing history or cookies, or very specific, like only allowing it to change how a particular website looks.
Okay, so what are some of the main types of permissions we should be aware of?
Well, it's helpful to look at this through the lens of how things have evolved. If we look at the manifest.json file, especially with the changes from manifest v2 to v3, we see things like the basic permissions themselves. In the older manifest v2, this could be a really wide-ranging category, covering things like access to your cookies or browsing history, even things like Bluetooth. But with manifest v3, they introduced host permissions as a separate, more granular category.
So that sounds like a good thing for security, right? More specific control.
It is. It basically says, okay, this extension can interact with these specific websites, and it lays out the exact URLs. For example, if you see something like https.example.com, that means the extension can access anything on example.com, any subdomain, as long as it's using HTTPS.
Okay, so it's about being precise about which websites the extension can touch.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And then there's another interesting concept, optional permissions and optional host permissions. These are kind of cool because the extension doesn't actually ask for them right when you install it. It only asks for them later, usually when you try to use a specific feature that needs that permission.
Oh, I see. So it's like, okay, you want to use this specific feature. Well, now I need access to this. Are you okay with that?
Exactly. It gives you, the user, more control. You're not just saying yes to everything up front. You can make decisions as you go.
I like that. It feels a lot more privacy friendly.
It is. And then we also have things like content scripts.matches. These are basically instructions that tell the browser which specific websites, the extensions, little bits of code the content scripts are allowed to run on. They can interact with the page content, change things, or pull information.
So they're like little agents embedded in the page, but only on certain websites.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It's also important to remember that some of the most powerful permissions can't be optional. Things like using the debugger tools, controlling network requests with declarative net request, accessing your location with geolocation, managing proxy settings, or using text-to-speech features, those have to be granted up front when you install the extension.
I see. So those are the ones that could potentially be used for more, shall we say, creative purposes.
You could say that, yes. They're the ones that give an extension a lot of control over your browser and your system.
Okay, so we've got all these different types of permissions. They define what an extension can do and what it can access. But why should we, as users, really care about this? What's the worst that could happen if an extension has a few too many permissions or the wrong kind?
Well, this is where it gets really important. Research has actually shown that a surprisingly high number of extensions, like over 50%, ask for way more permissions than they actually need. Think about that for a second. More than half of the extensions out there might have the ability to do a lot more than they tell you.
Wow, that's a pretty unsettling statistic.
It is. And the big risk here is that these extensions could be exploited maliciously or could accidentally expose your data. If an extension has access to all websites, even if it seems like a harmless little tool, it creates this huge potential attack surface. If that extension gets compromised, or if the company that makes it gets bought by someone with bad intentions, suddenly they could have access to a ton of your sensitive information, your passwords, your banking details, everything you do online.
So it's not even necessarily about the extension itself being bad, but about the potential for misuse down the line.
Exactly. It's also a nightmare for companies trying to maintain security because these unapproved extensions can slip past their normal safeguards and create all sorts of vulnerabilities.
And it's not always about deliberate malice, right?
Right.
I can see how even well-meaning developers might just ask for more than they need, maybe because they're planning to add features later, or just because it's easier.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, most people don't really take the time to look into the developers behind these extensions. We don't check their privacy policies. We don't see how to contact them. We don't even know where they're based. And we often just blindly click accept without really thinking about whether those permissions make sense for what the extension is supposed to do.
Yeah, we're all guilty of that.
It's also worth pointing out that while app stores might check if an extension has a privacy policy link, they don't actually verify if that policy is any good or even if it makes sense.
Right, so just seeing the word privacy policy doesn't mean you're actually protected.
Exactly. You really have to be proactive and do your own due diligence.
Okay, so let's talk about that Download Manager Integration Checklist extension you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
How does that fit into this whole picture of risky permissions?
So this extension is a perfect example of how misleading permissions can be. On the surface, it looked like a simple, helpful tool. It claimed to download a checklist from Firebase, something that really shouldn't need any special access. But when they dug deeper, it turned out to be asking for broad access to all websites and the declarative net request permission.
And we talked about that earlier, that permission lets an extension mess with network requests.
Exactly. So right away, there was this huge mismatch between what it said it did and the level of access it wanted. That should have been a big red flag right there. It just shows how even seemingly innocuous extensions can be hiding some really shady stuff.
Yeah, it's like using a chainsaw to cut a piece of paper.
Pretty much. You're right. It's way overkill.
You also mentioned shadow IT before. Can you explain what that is and why it's a problem in this context?
Sure. Shadow IT is essentially when people within a company start using software or tools without their IT department knowing about it or approving it. It often happens because individuals want to be more productive or find easier ways to do things, and they just download whatever they need without thinking about the bigger picture. Browser extensions are a classic example of this. They're so easy to install that people might just add them without considering the security implications for their entire organization.
So it creates this whole underground network of unmanaged software that the IT guys have no idea about.
Exactly. And that can create a lot of vulnerabilities and make it really hard for companies to enforce their security policies.
So we've talked about the importance of permissions and the dangers of having too many or the wrong kind. But let's get specific about the types of bad extensions we should be looking out for. I'm guessing it's not just one type of threat out there, right?
Yeah. You're right. We can generally categorize harmful extension into a few main types. First, there are the ones that are just risky or permission heavy. These are often legitimate extensions that, as we discussed, ask for way more access than they need. While they might not be intentionally malicious, this overreach creates vulnerabilities that could be exploited.
So it's like leaving your front door unlocked, you might be fine, but why take the chance?
That's a good way to put it. Then we have the truly malicious extensions. These are the ones designed specifically to do harm, steal your data, spy on you, or install malware on your computer. And what's scary is that these have even been found in official app stores with millions of downloads.
Really? So even the official stores aren't a foolproof guarantee of safety?
Unfortunately not. You always have to be careful. The Download Manager Integration Checklist extension we'll talk about in a bit is a good example of a seemingly harmless extension with hidden malicious functionality.
Okay, that's unsettling. So what's the third type?
The third type is privacy intrusive extensions. These might not actively try to harm you, but they collect a lot of your data without really needing it or getting your clear consent. They might be tracking your browsing, grabbing information from forms you fill out, or just monitoring your online behavior in general.
So like the nosy neighbors of the internet, always peeking over your shoulder.
Exactly. And while they might not be as immediately dangerous as an extension that steals your passwords, they're still a serious invasion of your privacy.
Okay, so it's a spectrum of badness, from potentially risky to actively malicious to just being really creepy and data hungry. Let's dive into that download manager integration checklist example now. You said it had some hidden malicious stuff going on. What exactly did the analysis uncover?
Well, the more they looked into this extension, the more disturbing it became. Even though it presented itself as a simple checklist tool, downloading content from Firebase, it turned out to have several hidden functions. For one thing, it was downloading another checklist from this completely separate and suspicious website, https://help.internet downloadmanager.topchecklist. And what it did with the response from that download is where things got really interesting.
Okay, what was it doing?
It was using that response to dynamically add rules to something called declarative net request. And if you remember, that's the permission that allows an extension to control network requests.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
So what it was doing was essentially turning off the content security policy, or CSP, on every website you visited. CSP is this important security feature that helps prevent a whole range of attacks, including something called cross-site scripting. By disabling it, the extension was basically making every website you went to much more vulnerable to attacks.
That's not good. It's like disabling the alarm system on your house.
Exactly. And it didn't stop there. It also had this sneaky way of running code, JavaScript code, that could be sent to it remotely. It did this by manipulating the onReset attribute of the document element after receiving certain messages. So whoever controlled the extension could basically send new instructions at any time that would then be run on any website the user visited.
Oh, wow. So someone sitting at their computer could essentially run programs on my computer through my web browser.
Yes, that's exactly what it means, and it gets even more complex. The extension would also download this big chunk of data, about 256 kilobytes, from another shady address, https://internetdownloadmanager.topbbff. This data turned out to be a specially encoded data structure called a Bloom filter.
A Bloom filter, that sounds complicated. What is that in simple terms, and what was it being used for here?
So a Bloom filter is a very efficient way to check if something is likely to be on a specific list. Imagine you have a list of 1,000,000 names, and you want to quickly see if a particular name is on that list without having to search through the whole thing. A Bloom filter lets you do that really quickly, but with a small chance of a false positive.
Okay, I kind of get it. So what was the list in this case?
In this case, the list contains scrambled versions. We call them hashes of website addresses. The extension would take the address of the website you were currently visiting, scramble it in the same way, and check if that scrambled version was on its secret list. If it was a match, it would trigger some of its more malicious behavior. What's fascinating is that the list initially looked totally random, like a jumble of unrelated websites. But it was later identified as a list of advertisers connected to this specific advertising company called Ad Index.
Ah, so this wasn't just random maliciousness, it was targeted. It was looking for users who were visiting certain types of websites related to advertising.
Exactly. And when it landed on one of those targeted websites, what did it do? It sent the full address of the page you were on to yet another remote server, https://internetdownloadmanager.topcwc2. The most likely reason for this was to collect and potentially sell information about your browsing habits on these advertising-related sites.
So it was building a profile of your interests based on which ads or advertisers you were exposed to.
Pretty much. But it gets even creepier. If the website you were on matched its secret list, the extension would also open a special kind of connection called a WebSocket connection to wss.internetdownloadmanager.topsession. This connection was used to secretly record and then replay your browsing sessions, seemingly for the purpose of ad fraud.
Ad frog, what do you mean?
So they actually observed this happening on the Ashley Madison website. The extension would record a user's browsing session, and then it would replay those actions, clicks, scrolling, everything. But this time, it would route the traffic through a server belonging to AdIndex. It was basically generating fake clicks on ads to make money for these websites, using your computer and internet connection without your knowledge.
That's wild. So not only was it spying on you, but it was also hijacking your browsing to make money for someone else.
It's a pretty sophisticated operation when you think about it. And what's more, the researchers found other malicious extensions doing very similar things, suggesting it was part of a larger coordinated effort.
So this wasn't just some lone wolf hacker. This was organized crime.
It really looks that way, and it just highlights how complex and sneaky this world of malicious extensions can be.
Okay, so beyond this specific example, what are some other red flags we should be looking out for? What are some common ways that malicious extensions try to trick us or exploit our systems?
Well, one common tactic is to add this rule that says any website can access information from any other website. It looks like this: access control, allow origin. This might sound technical, but what it does is basically break down the barriers between different websites, making it much easier for attackers to steal data or inject malicious code.
So it's like opening all the doors between rooms in your house, making it easy for anyone to wander around wherever they want.
Exactly. And there have also been cases where vulnerabilities in extensions, even extensions designed to manage other extensions, have been exploited to inject malicious code and take over people's computers.
It's like the security guard turning out to be the bad guy.
Sometimes, yeah. And another big area of concern is how extensions handle sensitive information like passwords. Researchers have found some pretty alarming practices. Some extensions store passwords using really weak encryption like base64 encoding, which is incredibly easy to crack. Others just store them in plain text in the browser's memory, where other malicious software could potentially grab them.
So even if the extension itself isn't malicious, it might be handling your data in a way that makes it really vulnerable.
Exactly. And there have even been cases where sensitive data has been embedded directly into website addresses, the URLs. This means that information could end up in your browser history, server logs, and all sorts of other places where it shouldn't be.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty scary. What can we, as regular internet users, actually do to protect ourselves? How can we be smarter about choosing and installing extensions?
There are several practical steps you can take. First and foremost, always try to install extensions only from sources you trust. The official web stores, like the Chrome Web Store or the Firefox add-on site, have at least some level of review process, so sticking to those does offer a bit more protection.
So it's like shopping at a reputable store rather than buying something from a guy in a van in a back alley.
Pretty much. But even then, you can't be too careful. Always take the time to read the permissions before you install anything. If a simple tool is asking for access to all websites, that's a huge warning sign. And be wary of extensions that suddenly ask for new permissions after you've already installed them. If you don't understand why it needs that new access, it's probably best to just get rid of it.
So trust but verify, right?
Absolutely. And don't forget about your regular security software. Having good antivirus protection is still crucial. It can help detect and block malicious code that might be hiding in extensions.
Right, so it's not just about being careful with extensions. It's about having a solid security foundation overall.
Exactly. Your antivirus is your first line of defense against all sorts of threats, including those that might come through extensions.
Good to know. Are there any other tools or resources that we can use to help us vet extensions?
Yeah, if you're using Chrome and you want to get a bit more technical, there's a website called crexcavator.io. It can give you a more detailed security analysis of a particular extension.
I'll have to check that out. So, what else should we be looking for when we're evaluating an extension?
Well, pay attention to the developer information. On the extensions page in the store, you should be able to find details about who made it, their organization name, a physical address, an email contact, and a link to their privacy policy.
Hmm.
Be wary if any of that is missing, or if they're using generic email addresses like at gmail.com. It just doesn't look very professional.
It's like if they're not willing to put their real information out there, what are they hiding, right?
Exactly. Also, take a look at the update history. Developers who are actively maintaining their extensions and fixing security issues will usually have a history of recent updates. If an extension hasn't been updated in a long time, that could be a sign that it's been abandoned and might be more vulnerable to attacks.
So we're looking for signs of life, basically. Active development is a good sign.
It is. And consider where the developer is based. Some countries have much stronger data protection laws than others, so that might give you a little extra peace of mind.
Right, it's another factor to consider.
Absolutely. Now, what about the extensions you already have installed? Should you just assume they're all good?
Hopefully.
No, not necessarily. It's a good idea to regularly audit the extensions you have installed. Go through the list, uninstall anything you're not actively using, and reevaluate the permissions of the ones you keep. And if you use different profiles in Chrome or other browsers, remember to check each profile separately.
That's a good point. I often forget that I have different extensions running in different profiles. So we're not just talking about installing new extensions. We're talking about being mindful of what we already have.
Exactly. And finally, just be extra cautious of any extension that asks for really powerful permissions, like being able to access all websites, monitor your keystrokes, or access your clipboard, especially if the reason for needing those permissions isn't crystal clear or if the developer doesn't have a good reputation. It's always better to err on the side of caution.
So for businesses, this isn't just a minor annoyance. It's a real security risk that needs active management, not just something to be left to individual employees to figure out. What specific advice do you have for companies that are trying to get a handle on this?
Well, for businesses, implementing what's called browser governance is absolutely crucial. They need to have systems in place to control which extensions are allowed, who can install them, and what permissions they have.
So it's like having a company policy for extensions, just like you'd have for any other software.
Exactly. There are some really good solutions out there that can help with this. For example, Perception Point's advanced browser security, which integrates with spin.ai for risk assessment, can give organizations the visibility and control they need.
And what do those tools actually do?
These tools can give you a complete inventory of all the extensions installed across the entire company, along with a risk score for each one and a clear breakdown of the permissions they have. This allows you to regularly audit the extensions being used and identify any that are risky or haven't been approved.
Ah, so it's like having a central dashboard where you can see everything that's going on with extensions across your entire workforce.
That's a great way to put it. And this level of visibility and control is really essential for businesses to manage the risks associated with browser extensions.
So wrapping all this up, these little tools that we rely on every day, these extensions, can be incredibly useful, but we need to approach them with a bit more awareness and caution than we might have in the past.
I completely agree. We have to be more mindful of the permissions we're granting and the potential risks involved.
So everyone listening, take a few minutes after this to go through your installed extensions. Do you still need them all? Do the permissions make sense? And before you install any new ones, really think about whether you trust the developer and whether you're comfortable with the level of access they're asking for.
Those are great takeaways. It really comes down to being a more informed and careful user.
And I think that's a good place to leave it for today. In a world where we're constantly connected, how do we strike the right balance between convenience and security? It's a question we all need to be thinking about.
I think that's a very important point.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Say hello to Tech Unplugged.
Hello, Tech Unplugged.
And thank you all for tuning in. We hope you found this informative and, well, maybe a little bit eye-opening.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for more deep dives coming soon.